Hello everyone and welcome back to another Fate video. Today, I'm going to conclude this series designed entirely for people to tell me that I have no idea what I'm talking about. That's right, I am once again delving into the realm of gameplay to tell you my picks for the top 10 worst 5-star servants in all of FGO. Now, being among the worst 5-star servants is like saying you got a $5,000 PC instead of a $10,000 one. Both are insanely powerful and useful. One just happens to have better specs, and all of them are better than a $1,000 PC or a laptop. That is to say, every 5-star servant in the game is good. It is possible to make every single one of them work in your favor. However, somebody has to be the worst of the good bunch. So, that's what today is all about. Keep in mind, as I have said this before, this is not a waifu or husbando tier list. When I say X character is bad, I am not calling you stupid for liking them. In fact, if you love these characters, you know their flaws better than anyone else. This is also being made under the assumption that you have the unit in question, and budget options for supports. So, just because a character can Scotty loop does not make them good on their own outside of that niche. We're assuming that you don't have Scotty, you have this character. So this is a list considering that this is your one and only 5-star, and that you have maxed out their skills to 10, 10, 10, and that you have them at NP 1. Also, this is going to be JP friendly, so all the buffs that are on JP will apply to these guys as well. Cool, great, let's get started. Number 10, let's start with who I would consider to be the best of the worst units. Vlad Berserker. Vlad has gone through some extreme changes over the years. Being unique in the Berserker class is a rare single-target arts Berserker. At launch, he was terrible and squishy. Now he is much better, but still suffers from extreme issues. But let's take a look at his skill set. His first skill is Vampirism, which charges his MP gauge by 30% and also decreases the enemies by 1. His second skill is Legend of Dracul, which is a 3-turn buff to both his attack and defense by 30%, so this will be up most of the battle. Finally, he has Fearsome Immortal, which is his best skill by far. It is a 2x Guts, one lasting for 1 turn and one lasting for 5, both that will res him with 2500 HP. It also increases his NP generation by 30% for 3 turns on a 7-turn cooldown. This skill is his only way of surviving being hit by an enemy NP, but Vlad's main draw is his NP. A single target arts NP that creates 20 stars and also decreases enemy arts resist by 20% for 3 turns. Vlad lives and dies by this NP. It is what makes him usable. He can spam this out fairly well, and once he starts snowballing, he's hard to slow down. His biggest issue is that outside of his NP, his damage is lackluster for a Berserker, his NP gain rate is not great, and his hit counts are fairly low, so he needs help to survive on the field to get his NP going. He and the next person on this list, thankfully, benefit from the budget supports like Hans and Mozart. Notably good partners for him are Mash and George, both of whom can help keep him alive for longer fights. I have Vlad and have used him occasionally, but he is unfortunately outclassed by some of the 4-star options, not just Herc, but like Jalterzerker and Atlanta Alter as well. That said, if you can get him going, he is an absolute monster of a unit. Number 9 is Arjuna. Arjuna has gone through some transformations since his release that make him much better. However, he is still not comparable to his alter form. He has grown to become a farming servant, whose gimmick is that he can instant kill with his NP, and has an even better chance to do so if it is against a divine enemy. It is well known in the FGO community that instant kill is almost worthless as an ability, save for that rare occasion where Gramps can one-shot the challenge quest. Let's look at his skills. Arjuna's first skill is a 50% increase to star generation for 3 turns and a debuff immunity for 5 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. This skill is insanely broken, until you consider the fact that Arjuna has 1 quick card. The near permanent debuff immune is nice though. His second skill is the one that makes him shine the best. It directly charges his NP gauge by 25%, recovers 2000 HP every turn for 5 turns, gains 8 crit stars every turn for 5 turns, and charges his NP gauge by 10% at the end of every turn for 5 turns, all on an 8-turn cooldown. This ability is absolutely insane, and is what allows him to be a viable farming servant. His third skill is a 30% buster with an additional 20% increased NP damage for 1 turn. Speaking of which, his NP is an AoE buster nuke that, as mentioned, has a chance to instant kill. This on paper sounds amazing. The problem? He does no damage and he relies heavily on that second skill to work. Without the buff to his second skill, he would be much lower on this list, resigned to being a one-and-done farming unit, not befitting of a hero of ancient myth. but because of the consistency that the skill provides, he can be placed this high. However, once again, this is entirely limited to his skills, and the long cooldowns don't help. At least you can summon a support Tamamo to help reduce that. Number 8 is Void Sheiki. This is a character that I have done a lot of playtesting with, after getting her out of the GSSR last year. Her niche is that she is an AoE art saber that specializes in farming and more drawn-out fights. Her gimmick is that she has instant kill attached to her NP, and in theory, should be able to get this NP often and spam it out. Her first skill helps with this, being a 40% arts mana burst and increases her instant death chance, and also grants ignore invincibility. Essentially, this is best used on the turn that you're going to be NPing, so that you can guarantee the hit and that you hit hard. Her second skill is a 3-turn attack up for herself for 25%, and also grants a mild mental debuff immunity. This is pretty okay as well, and can be up for most of the battle. Her third skill is a whopping 5,000 health heal for the low cost of 10 NP gauge, and on a 4-turn cooldown no less, which is absolutely insane. But herein lies the issue with Sheiki. She has incredibly bad NP gain due to her low NP gain rate, as well as the low hits on her cards. Her NP does not help this, as it is a single hit AoE that has a chance to instant kill. Mind you, this NP has gotten better and it helps settle her into a nice niche, as it now also removes the party's debuffs and charges their NP gauges by 10%. Again, this is all well and good, but she has a hard time getting this back up without the top tier supports. So, while farming with her may be difficult, she does settle into the niche of being an amazing stalling option, benefiting from the budget supports like Hans and Mozart, both of whom can help her get her NP back quickly. If you are a whale though, double Tamamo for stalling teams makes her absolutely insane. But because we're not considering that you have a Tamamo, she's going to stay where she is here. Number 7 is Jinako Kirigiri, or Ganesha. Jinako is a character whose design I love, and whose personality is really cute. She is also not awful in terms of gameplay, but she needs to be played in a very specific way. She is a tank support hybrid, who touts the ever-elusive Moon Cancer class. This means that she will do and take neutral damage from most enemies, which as a tank is very good. Against Avengers, she should be your go-to support, as her kit does well to offset the mass amounts of damage and crits that the Avenger class is so well known for. Let's look at her skill set now. Her first skill is a party-wide 20% NP battery that also increases their attack by 20%, as well as making a star generator for 5 stars for 3 turns. This skill is on a 6-turn cooldown, which may seem long, but when you compare it to similar characters like HPB or Asclepius who offer similar buffs, it's actually 1 turn less, which is interesting. Her second skill is her taunt, which bumps up her defense by 1000 for 1 turn, and her attack by 30% for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. This is her own primary defensive option that allows her to draw attention away from your main DPS, as well as making her tougher and stronger, which is nice. Her third skill is a targetable invincibility with an added 30% NP generation buff for 1 turn. This effect technically has a downside, but to be affected by it you have to be absent-minded, as it is a skill steal. Again, this just means to use the skills of whatever unit you're targeting first and then place this on them. If you mess that up, it is exclusively on you, not her. Her NP is an AoE arts that reduces enemy defense by 30% before hitting for 3 turns, grants the party 1 turn of invincibility, and then heals herself for 2000 HP. On paper, this looks phenomenal, and in a way it really is. But herein lies her issue. She has a severe lack of damage and god-awful NP gain. The damage is less important because she's a tank support, the NP gain has to be addressed. When her skills are up, she is insane. When they are on cooldown, she is quite literally dead weight, no pun intended. It is unfair, but necessary, to compare her to other tanks in the game. These are really just limited to Mash, Leonidas, Daon, and George. You could argue that having a taunt makes you a tank, but a character's skill set has to be geared towards this end as well, so in that vein, she is the second worst true tank in the game, after Daon, and even then an argument can be made. George has a 3-turn taunt to keep enemies off of your DPS, as well as a guts and a heal not tied to his NP. Leonidas provides a potentially endless slew of taunt due to his natural taunt in his NP, as well as the guts to keep him alive, and his taunt skill is able to get him his NP quickly, while also fitting in nicely in Buster teams. Mash is legitimately just one of the best characters in the game hands down, and Orthodox Mash, while worse than regular Mash, still can keep a frontline defended with 2 different taunts and an NP that bumps up their defense. Daon has the 3-turn taunt and an evade, as well as a mediocre NP which could potentially cut attacks and defenses and maybe charm, but honestly, if we're going to be comparing Daon to a 5-star, there's something wrong. When Jinako is good, she is very good, but after that she drops off super hard. This does not mean that she is unusable, and if you pair her with a Tamamo to reduce her skill cooldowns and charge her NP, she works fairly well, but outside of this, she's just mediocre as a unit. We need a summer version. Number 6 is Orion Artemis. Fun fact, this unit is counted as a male, so her second skill is effective against her. That said, I will be calling this unit by the female pronouns as I personally associate it with Artemis over Orion. Anyway, Orion is weird. I say this because this is a character that is brought up a lot in the story and in various events, and is very fun as a character, but her kit has been completely untouched, save for an NP upgrade. This kit is somehow both innovative and outdated at the exact same time. Let me explain. Her first skill is a 50% defense buff for 1 turn that also bumps her attack by 20% for 3 turns, and increases her debuff resist by 50% for 3 turns, all on a 5-turn cooldown, meaning that this can be up for most of the battle. Her second skill is by far her best, a 100% damage up against male enemies for 1 turn on a 5-turn cooldown. This is the skill that makes me say she is innovative for the time of her release. This is a skill type that we see a fair amount of now in the game, with the 100% damage buff against blank like Izo to humanoids. But for the time, this must have seemed broken, and to a degree it was, as I played through the game at that time. It is a hardy skill that makes her damage incredible in very specific fights. Her third skill is Mind's Eye Fake, which is an evade with a 34% crit buff for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. Her NP is a single target arts hit that reduces attack damage of the enemy by 20% for 3 turns, and reduces their NP gauge by 1. When this is paired with her first skill, she has the potential to eradicate a male Saber or Berserker. But here's the problem. There are only 18 male Saber servants in the game at this time, and several NPCs that you will be fighting throughout the game are effectively genderless, nullifying this skill in its entirety, meaning that she is now limited in the content that you can effectively bring her to. Against Berserkers, there are simply better DPS options with more consistent damage than she can provide, so she is stuck in her niche of being a male Saber killer. In my previous videos, people have pointed out that having a niche does not make a character bad, and on this you are all correct. Sometimes you need to pull out the nail file on the Swiss Army knife, but how often does that happen is the question. The problem that needs to be viewed with niches is how often do they pop up, and how well the character in question can excel in that niche. Let's look at Sanson, for example. His niche is that he kills evil humans, and in that regard, he's amazing. But how often does that appear? It is incredibly rare. Meanwhile, Izo does this exact same job, but with a wider range of targets because he kills humanoids, and also nestles into being a crit DPS and star generator. See what I'm saying? So while Orion's kit is niche, being anti-male, and can be brought along to deal with male enemies of every class save for Lancer, she is outclassed by a unit that does this exact same thing, but offers more utility to a team, as well as only having a 3-star cost. Uriel. You trade off a bit of the damage for more consistency, and bam, Uriel is a more effective unit. And if you're just in the market for arts archers, units like Chloe and Robin are budget options that do effectively the same thing but are more consistent. Orion needs a buff, possibly to her third skill to broaden her niche, because for the Goddess of the Hunt to be outclassed by a homeless man with a bird, that's pretty rough. Number 5, we have Okita Alter. She reminds me of a certain other servant with her skill set. No, that's not fair. Okita is one of my favorite Saber faces. Okita faces are great, and she has gone through some fairly substantial buffs to her kit. Despite this, she still suffers from being an infant heroic spirit. Let's take a look. Her first skill is a 30% buff to her quick and buster cards for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. Solid. Her second skill charges her NP by 30%, increases her star gather rate by 500%, and buffs her attack by 20% on a 6-turn cooldown. This is okay. Her third skill is her best one, giving her a 30% NP damage up, 2 stacks of NP overcharge, and a weak protection from arrows effect for 2 hits for 3 turns, all on a 5-turn cooldown. Her NP is an AoE buster that has the overcharge of reducing the buster resistance of enemies by 20% on start, but with her third skill, this becomes 40% buster resist down. All in all, this does not seem so bad. The issue mostly comes from a combination of her class, as well as her already low attack. Okita is built to do damage, and her skill set would have you believe that. Her natural attack is fairly low for starters, so when her first and third skills are not up, she hits like a pool noodle. Her class gives her advantage over the cavalry classes, albeit not as good as actual counterclassing would provide, which also puts a damper on her damage. Her kit is also designed to fire off her NP as often as possible, as the Buster Down helps out not just her but her team as well. Unfortunately, her natural NP gain rate leaves much to be desired, and as a result, takes a while to get going after firing off her NP once. That said, she can be used alongside cheap supports who can either give her stars or damage buffs, or better yet, direct NP. So she pairs very nicely with the Machine Gong, Shakespeare, and Hans, all of whom can buff her damage, crits, NP, or all of the above. This character is very fixable through a team comp, but does require being babysat to avoid falling off. Number 4, we have Bunny Artoria. If this were a design tier list, she would be here. However, her skill set does not live up to the fishnets. Bunny Artoria is a mix of support and DPS, and as a ruler, this makes things complicated, as she does not have class advantage against anything, save for Berserkers and Moon Cancers. If I had to describe Bunny Artoria in one word, it would be unique. There is no other character in this game that is like her, and that gives her the fun position of being a one-of-a-kind. But that does not necessarily make her good. Her first skill is a 40% NP charge that also gives her an evade and the Royal Bunny jump status. They missed the chance to make a special animation for this of her jumping up in the air. The Royal Bunny jump pops the following turn, giving her a 30% attack buff. This is great on a thematic level, but getting a 40% NP gauge is frustrating. Many of the best CEs give 50% starting NP, so this skill, which appears to be made to help her start off with an NP, delays that by one turn and doesn't even get the job all the way done. The payoff being a 30% attack up is also lackluster. A servant with a similar skill is Ishtar, with a 50% attack buff on a 3-turn cooldown, as opposed to the 6-turn one. Granted, Bunny Artoria's skill does do more. Her second skill is a card shuffle. This skill has been buffed to be able to exclude one servant's deck in an attempt to make it easier for your main DPS to show up and take advantage of the other parts of the skill, which is a 3-turn crit damage up for 50% and a 1-turn NP generation up by 30%, all on a 5-turn cooldown. Finally, and most confusing, is her third skill, which gives her a 40% attack for 3 turns and 1-turn crit star absorption buff. This skill implies that you are meant to be using her as a crit DPS. Her NP is an AoE buster, Yacht Slam, that ignores defense and charges NP damage, and charges NP by 20%, with a powerful overcharge effect of casting a 20% projection on her for 3 turns. To me, this is confusing, once again. Her damage overall is not good, and her inability to counterclass is both a boon and a bane. They want you to use her as a crit DPS, but her second skill is more powerful as a support skill. The lack of a full 50% NP charge also does not help, meaning that you have to rely on a K-scope and imaginary numbers to farm, putting a damper on her overall damage. Having playtested her both pre- and post-buff, she is lackluster as a servant. I've tried using her as a DPS. Thank you to the friend support who has her at 10-10-10 and level 100, and she's just okay. But that's the thing. As a 5-star servant, you need to be more than just okay. You want to be great. But unfortunately, she falls short by the wayside of being better than fine. To personally fix her kit, I would either add a star bomb for 20 stars on her first or third skill, and that would make her more consistent. She is fun to use though, just not practical. Number 3 is Sigurd. For this video in particular, I have playtested him against his direct competition as a Dragon Slayer, Siegfried, as I am fortunate enough to own both. My findings show that Siegfried is more effective as a unit overall, as well as a better Dragon Slayer. They occupy the same niche of being Dragon Slayers, albeit doing so in different ways. Siegfried is an AoE buster unit with normally low attack, but a third skill that increases his dragon damage by 80% for 3 turns, as well as his buster damage by 50% for 1 turn. And even further, he does more damage to dragons thanks to a 150% damage buff against them attached to his NP. In comparison, Sigurd is a single target buster unit whose niche for dragon slaying is exclusive to his NP with the same 150% damage multiplier. Now, it should be noted that while they both occupy this niche, their playstyles are completely different. Siegfried is meant to be beefier and to spam out his NP with the help of his first and second skills, while Sigurd is built for crit teams. He touts a whopping 100% crit damage buff on his first skill for 3 attacks for 3 turns, all on a 5-turn cooldown. His second skill is a 50% buster up that also grants him guts for 1 times for 3 turns on an unfortunate 7-turn cooldown. His third skill is a targetable 100% star gen up with a debuff immune tied to it with a 5-turn cooldown. Sigurd is all about that one huge turn. If you are able to put him into the position where he can NP Brave Chain with crits while his first and second skill are active, he is ridiculously powerful. But outside of that one amazing turn, he suffers from low damage and he just becomes a standard big saber. His usability is low outside of this one huge turn, and it takes 7 turns to set back up. In comparison, Siegfried's third skill is his bread and butter and is up for the majority of the fight, with him also able to snowball out of control thanks to the overcharge effect on his NP, giving him 20% NP gain for 3 turns. I compare these two because they share so many similarities and occupy the same niche. The big difference being that one is one of the first servants that you're able to summon, and the other one is a Lost Belt 5-star. The easiest way to fix him is by either making his third skill party-wide, or giving him a Star Bomb or a Crit Star Gather Rate, because at this moment in time, he has no way of getting those stars for himself. In a thematic sense, this is cute because he pairs very well with Brynhild, as her third skill solves this problem for him. But she is limited and elusive, so if you have her, put that couple together, because otherwise he ain't gonna work so well. Number 2 is Sherazati. God, I hope I said that right. Fun fact, I have had Sherazati on my main account since Agartha first dropped, and I have never once let her die, nor do I plan to. Cher falls under the problem of having nestled herself too deeply into her niche, and is not usable really outside of it. She hates kings. Her kit is designed to cuck king-type enemies. In an ideal situation, you are fighting a male king assassin. Less ideal, it's a king assassin. Less ideal, it's a male king berserker. Less ideal, it's a king berserker. Here is a list of male king assassins. Now king assassins. Cher as a unit is fun to use and fun to make work, but you have to bring her for certain circumstances. Her first skill reduces one enemy's NP gauge by 1, increases her arts cards by 30% for 1 turn, and charges her NP gauge by 30%. Her second skill has an unfortunate 60% chance to charm all male enemies for 1 turn, and increases her defense by 40% for 2 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. Her third skill is her best one, giving herself guts for 5 turns, the party guts for 2 turns, and reducing a king enemy's attack by 50%. Her NP is an anti-king arts AoE that buffs its own damage by 20% and then reduces the enemy debuff resist by 50% for 3 turns, while also dealing 200% extra damage against king enemies. Through virtue of being a caster, she has naturally low attack, but even among casters, her attack is low. This is in large part because she has the highest HP of all current casters and the 5th highest in the game, period. If she were built to be more of a support, she would not be on this list. However, her kit is more geared towards her being a DPS, aside from the party-wide guts and the charm that does not work. She suffers from only excelling in her niche where others can still excel even greater. There are 4-star casters who offer more in terms of DPS and 3-star ones that offer guts to the party while also giving more. I love this character, but she unfortunately only operates well as a standard farming unit, and really, that is a sad existence for a 5-star unit. I hope that at some point in the future they will give her something that allows for her to spread her anti-king attack buffs to the party, or honestly, with the introduction of the sleep effect, incorporate that into her charming of males. I know canonically that her stories actually kept the king awake through the night, not giving him the opportunity to bed her and then kill her, but honestly, a party-wide sleep effect and call it bedtime story or something would be great for her. It certainly wouldn't fix her, but with her stat spread, she should be being used as a support rather than a DPS. And finally, number 1, my opinion for the worst 5-star unit in Fate Grand Order as of the recording of this video is Demon King Nobunaga. Oh, Nobu, my beloved. Why are you so bad? Well, let me tell you. Your attack is the 5th highest in the game, but your health is terrible. You were born to kill, but you need to set yourself up to do it. You have the potential to slay gods, but Zeus is only one boss fight. Demon King Nobu suffers from a fairly simple issue. She has no class advantage, except against rulers and berserkers, and only really shines when she's up against divine enemies. Mind you, divine enemies are not uncommon, but you would much rather be counterclassing them than relying on Nobu to use her AoE NP to kill one target. Let's look at her skills. Her first skill is the key to her kit. She will set the battlefield on fire for 5 turns, burn herself for 1000 damage every turn for 3 turns, and has an attack buff that ramps up from 30% on turn 1 to 50% on turn 2, and finally a massive 70% on turn 3. This skill is the one that makes or breaks Nobu. The burn demerit is worth mentioning, but you can give your Nobu the cure command code to clear the dots, so it is a non-issue unless it doesn't come up, in which case it is a problem because she has no HP. But the fact that she sets the battlefield on fire is what allows her to go off. Her other 2 skills require the battlefield to be on fire to work at max capacity. We'll get into why this is a huge problem here in a bit. Her second skill is a 1-turn invincibility that increases her buff removal resist by 100%. If the field is on fire, it increases damage against sky attribute enemies by 50% for 3 turns, all on a 6-turn cooldown. Her third skill is a 10-star star generator that increases her NP by 30%, and if the battlefield is on fire, increases her buster damage by 30% for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. Her NP is an AoE anti-god nuke that removes their defensive buffs, meaning that no god can hide from gag characters, with 150% extra damage to divine enemies, and burning them with a 1000 damage burn for 5 turns. In concept, she seems broken. In reality, it's a different story. I have Nobu at NP2 on my main account. Here is her issues from my experience. She needs 3 turns to effectively set herself up at minimum, assuming that you have a K-scope. After these 3 turns, she has one really big turn that in fairness can end the fight, but if it is a multi-bar enemy, she then has to wait 6 turns to operate effectively at minimum. This is because she has a Buster Art Quick deck, hampering her ability to get back her NP. You want to use her as a beatstick or a boss killer, but she is outclassed by every other Buster 5-star in the role, as well as some 4-stars such as Penth, Berserker, and Herc. I have to compare her to Berserkers because that is what her playstyle is mostly comparable to. She's a prime example of what I've said at the top. Every 5-star is great, but some are worse than others. She is the worst of the best. But at the very least, Lasagna seems to care about her, as they've given her 2 hefty buffs to her second and third skills. Honestly, if you give her a Star Bomb or an NP generation skill, she would be great. Better yet, a Star Absorption skill would really help out her non-1 big turn damage. They clearly want to go the route of making her a crit character. Now they just need to take that leap. Cause, look at her. Nobu's worth it. But that is it. This was a long one. But I hope that you all enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought in the comments, tell me your recommendations and who you think is the worst one down there as well. Like the videos, it really does help out the channel. Subscribe to catch these as they go up. Follow my Twitch for significantly less structured content. I also have a Twitter, but for now, keep your chin up. Peace.